In the summer of 1324, a caravan unlike anything the world had ever seen approached the gates of Cairo. The dust clouds it raised could be spotted from miles away, not from the footsteps of men, but from the weight of pure gold. Leading this procession was a West African emperor whose name would echo through 7 centuries, Mansa Musa of Mali. What happened next would crash the economy of Egypt for over a decade and put Africa on every map from Spain to Syria. This wasn't just wealth, this was power that could reshape civilizations with a single generous gesture. The man at its center controlled more gold than entire European kingdoms combined, yet most of the world had never heard his name. Today, we're uncovering the complete story behind history's most spectacular display of riches, and why the true source of Mansa Musa's power ran far deeper than the gold that made him legendary. If you're fascinated by stories where history, economics, and human ambition collide on an epic scale, this journey through medieval Africa's golden age will completely change how you view wealth, power, and the interconnected world of the 14th century. Make sure you're subscribed because we're diving deep into one of history's most extraordinary tales, one that reveals Africa as the beating economic heart of the medieval world. The following historical narrative is based on extensive research of medieval Arabic sources, archaeological evidence, and scholarly analysis. While we strive for accuracy, some aspects of 14th century West African history remain subject to scholarly interpretation due to limited primary sources. This presentation synthesizes the most current historical consensus while acknowledging areas of ongoing research. Mali in 1312 wasn't just another medieval kingdom, it was an economic superpower controlling the lifeblood of 3 continents. When Mansa Musa inherited the throne, he became ruler of an empire that stretched from the Atlantic coast to the bend of the Niger River, encompassing modern-day Mali, Senegal, Mauritania, Guinea, Gambia, Niger, and parts of Burkina Faso and Ivory Coast. But maps don't tell the real story. The true foundation of Mali's power lay buried in the earth itself. Mali sat atop one of the world's richest geological formations. The Bambuk goldfields, located between the Senegal and Falémé rivers, had been producing the purest gold known to the medieval world for centuries. Archaeological evidence suggests these mines were already being worked by the 6th century CE, but it was under Mali's control that they reached unprecedented output. Contemporary Arabic chronicler Al-Umari, writing in the 1330s after meeting people who had witnessed Mansa Musa's Cairo visit, described Mali as controlling gold mines of Bambuk and Bure, where gold grew like plants. While this was clearly hyperbole, recent archaeological surveys have confirmed the extraordinary richness of these deposits. The Bure goldfields, discovered around 1200 CE in what is now Guinea, added another massive source to Mali's treasury. But here's what made Mali's situation unique. They didn't just control individual mines, they controlled the entire gold trade network. Every ounce of gold that moved from West Africa to North Africa, the Middle East, or Europe passed through Mali's trading posts and customs houses. Gold alone doesn't explain Mali's wealth. The empire's genius lay in controlling both sides of medieval Africa's most crucial trade equation: gold from the south and salt from the north. The salt mines of Taghaza, deep in the Sahara, were as valuable as any gold mine. In a world without refrigeration, salt wasn't a seasoning, it was survival. It preserved food, maintained health in hot climates, and enabled trade networks by keeping provisions fresh during long journeys. Medieval West African societies literally couldn't function without it. Archaeological excavations at Taghaza reveal the massive scale of salt production. Workers, mainly enslaved people and paid miners, carved enormous blocks weighing up to 90 kilograms from underground deposits. These blocks were so standardized that they became a currency in their own right. Ibn Battuta, the famous traveler who visited Taghaza in 1352, wrote that houses and mosques are built of blocks of salt, roofed with camel skins. Mali's control of the salt mines gave them leverage over every society south of the Sahara. Communities that tried to operate independently found themselves cut off from this essential resource. It was economic warfare through geology. Mali transformed from regional power to global empire by revolutionizing trade infrastructure. Previous West African states had relied on individual merchants and small caravans. Mali created the medieval world's first integrated logistics network. The empire established standardized weights and measures across their territory. Gold dust could be measured identically in Bambuk mines and Cairo markets. They created a postal system where messages could travel from Walata to Niani in record time. Most importantly, they guaranteed safe passage for merchants, a revolutionary concept in medieval trade. Contemporary sources describe Mali's road system as superior to many European kingdoms. Rest stations called caravanserais were spaced exactly 1 day's travel apart. Each station provided fresh water, food, security, and equipment maintenance. Merchants could travel from the Atlantic to the Mediterranean with the confidence that they'd find standardized, reliable services at every stop. Mali's wealth wasn't just about natural resources. It was about economic innovation that wouldn't look out of place in a modern business school. They pioneered credit systems that allowed merchants to deposit gold in one city and withdraw equivalent value in another, eliminating the need to transport heavy treasure across dangerous routes. They established the first known sub-Saharan banking houses, where international letters of credit were honored from Cairo to Cordoba. Mali also controlled the cowrie shell trade from the Indian Ocean, creating a standardized currency system across West Africa. Archaeological evidence from sites like Gao and Timbuktu shows cowrie shells being used alongside gold dust for everyday transactions, allowing Mali to keep their gold for international trade while maintaining local economic stability. But perhaps most importantly, Mali invested their gold wealth back into economic infrastructure. They funded the construction of mosques that doubled as universities, libraries, and technical schools. They hired foreign architects, engineers, and scholars. They created the medieval world's first systematic investment in human capital development. Life in 14th century Mali wasn't just wealthy by medieval African standards. It rivaled or exceeded contemporary European kingdoms in material comfort and technological sophistication. Archaeological excavations at sites like JONA-LORE reveal cities with sophisticated urban planning. Houses had multiple stories, indoor plumbing systems, and decorative elements made with imported materials. Iron tools were so common that they've been found in peasant households, while equivalent European sites show iron as a luxury item. The capital city of Niani, though its exact location remains debated, was described by Arabic sources as having palaces roofed with gold and gardens filled with foreign plants. While some descriptions were certainly exaggerated, archaeological evidence supports a high level of urban sophistication. Excavations have uncovered evidence of glass-making workshops, textile production facilities, and metalworking operations using techniques that wouldn't reach Europe for decades. Unlike many medieval societies where wealth concentrated in urban centers, Mali's gold economy created prosperity throughout their territory. Rural archaeological sites show evidence of imported goods, quality metalwork, and surplus food storage that indicates widespread economic security. Farmers in Mali weren't subsistence peasants, they were commercial producers. The empire's agricultural system supplied not just local needs, but exported surplus grain, dried meat, and crafted goods across the Sahara. Contemporary sources describe Malian leather goods being prized in Mediterranean markets for their quality and distinctive decorative techniques. Mali created something unique in the medieval world, a merchant class that was simultaneously highly educated and internationally connected. These weren't just traders, they were diplomats, scholars, and cultural ambassadors who spoke multiple languages and understood international law. Arabic sources describe Malian merchants as being literate, not just in local languages but in Arabic, enabling them to participate in the broader Islamic world's intellectual life. Archaeological evidence from Timbuktu and other centers shows private libraries with thousands of manuscripts covering law, science, mathematics, astronomy, and literature. These scholar merchants became Mali's secret weapon in international relations. When Mansa Musa appeared in Cairo, he wasn't just displaying wealth, he was demonstrating that Mali could engage with the sophisticated Islamic world as intellectual equals. In 1324, Mansa Musa announced his intention to perform the Hajj to Mecca. For any Muslim ruler, this was both a religious obligation and a political opportunity. For Mansa Musa, it became the most audacious display of wealth in recorded history. The planning alone reveals the sophistication of Mali's administration. Contemporary sources, particularly al-Umari's account written 12 years later based on eyewitness testimonies, describe a logistics operation that rivals modern state visits. The numbers are staggering even by today's standards. 60,000 people, including soldiers, merchants, scholars, servants, and pilgrims. But the medieval sources break this down in revealing detail. 12,000 personal servants and enslaved people, each carrying 4 pounds of gold, 500 herald slaves, each bearing a 6-pound golden staff, 80 camels, each loaded with between 50 and 300 pounds of gold dust, 10,000 horses for the cavalry and noble riders, several thousand additional pack animals carrying supplies. The total gold carried has been estimated by modern historians at anywhere from 18 to 24 tons worth over $1.5 billion in today's values. But contemporary sources suggest this was just Mansa Musa's spending money for the journey, not his entire treasury. The caravan didn't take the shortest route to Mecca. Instead, Mansa Musa chose a path that would maximize political and economic impact. From Niani, they traveled northeast to Walata, then across the Sahara to Taghaza, demonstrating control of the salt mines, then to Tuat, and finally to Cairo. Each stop was carefully orchestrated. In Walata, Mansa Musa distributed enough gold to local merchants to fund trading expeditions for years. At Taghaza, he made ceremonial visits to the salt mines, reinforcing Mali's control over this crucial resource. These weren't just rest stops, they were economic and political demonstrations. When Mansa Musa's caravan reached Cairo in July 1324, it created what modern economists would recognize as a massive liquidity injection into a medieval economy. Initially, there was a diplomatic crisis. Mamluk Sultan al-Nasir Muhammad expected Mansa Musa to follow standard protocol, prostrating himself and kissing the ground before the Sultan. Mansa Musa refused, declaring that he would bow only to Allah. This wasn't just religious conviction, it was a calculated political statement. By refusing to acknowledge the Sultan's superiority, Mansa Musa was asserting that Mali was an equal power, not a tributary state. After tense negotiations, they reached a compromise. Mansa Musa would bow toward Allah while greeting the Sultan, a solution that satisfied both Islamic protocol and political dignity. What happened next changed the economies of Egypt and beyond for over a decade. Al-Umari's account, based on interviews with Cairenes who witnessed the events, provides extraordinary detail. This man flooded Cairo with his benefactions. He left no court emir nor holder of a royal office without the gift of a load of gold. The Cairenes made incalculable profits out of him and his suite in buying and selling and giving and taking. But the economic impact went far beyond gift-giving. Mansa Musa's encouraged needed supplies, food, accommodation, transportation, guides, religious services, and countless other goods and services. They paid for everything with gold dust, creating an immediate and massive increase in Cairo's gold supply. The result was predictable but unprecedented: rapid inflation. Contemporary sources report that gold prices in Cairo dropped by 10 to 25% almost immediately. The mithqal, a standard Islamic unit of weight for gold, fell from 25 silver dirhams to 20 to 22 dirhams and stayed there for 12 years. Modern economic analysis suggests this inflation represented one of the first documented cases of monetary economics in action centuries before such theories were formally developed. The huge injection of gold into Cairo's economy meant that gold became less valuable relative to other goods, causing prices to rise dramatically. But here's what makes this particularly significant. Cairo wasn't just a local economy. It was a crucial node in international trade networks stretching from London to Beijing. The inflation rippled outward, affecting gold prices from Spain to India. Venetian merchants reported gold price fluctuations that they directly attributed to the African king's journey. Florentine bankers had to adjust their exchange rates. Muslim merchants across the Mediterranean found their gold worth less than it had been for decades. Mansa Musa had unintentionally demonstrated Mali's power to affect global economics not through military conquest, but through sheer economic force. When Mansa Musa realized what his generosity had done to Cairo's economy, he attempted an unprecedented economic intervention. Before leaving Cairo, he began borrowing back gold from local merchants at high interest rates, trying to reduce the oversupply he had created. This may be the first recorded attempt at deliberate monetary policy by a medieval ruler. Unfortunately, it had limited success. The amount of gold in circulation was simply too large to correct quickly through borrowing. In Mecca, Mansa Musa continued his lavish spending, distributing gold to pilgrims from across the Islamic world. Saudi historians record that the Hajj of 1324 was remembered for decades afterward as the Golden Pilgrimage. But the return journey revealed another dimension of Mansa Musa's sophistication. Having exhausted his traveling treasury through generosity, he needed to fund the return trip. Rather than sending messages back to Mali for more gold, which would have taken months, he arranged loans from Arab merchants. This created the first known international credit arrangement involving sub-Saharan Africa. Merchants from Cairo, Damascus, and Baghdad provided credit based on Mansa Musa's promise to repay from Mali's treasury. The fact that these merchants were willing to extend such credit to an African ruler demonstrates how completely Mansa Musa had established Mali's credibility in international markets. The pilgrimage wasn't just an economic event, it was a diplomatic masterstroke that transformed how the Islamic world viewed sub-Saharan Africa. During his journey, Mansa Musa recruited scholars, architects, poets, and lawyers to return with him to Mali. The Andalusian architect and poet Abu Ishaq al-Sahili agreed to design mosques and schools in Mali. Legal scholars from Cairo and Damascus joined the caravan to establish Islamic courts in Timbuktu and Gao. This wasn't cultural colonization, it was strategic cultural investment. By bringing Islamic scholars to Mali, Mansa Musa was ensuring that his empire could participate as an equal in the broader Islamic world's intellectual and legal frameworks. The pilgrimage established permanent diplomatic relationships between Mali and the major Islamic powers. When Mansa Musa reached Damascus, Baghdad, and other major cities, he met with rulers, merchants, and scholars who began viewing Mali as a significant ally rather than a distant curiosity. These relationships had lasting economic benefits. Merchants from across the Islamic world began planning trading expeditions to Mali. Scholars started including West African geography and politics in their writings. Mali was no longer exotic, it was integral to the Islamic world's economic and intellectual networks. Perhaps most importantly, Mansa Musa's pilgrimage put Mali literally on the map. The famous Catalan Atlas of 1375, created 50 years later, shows Mansa Musa as one of only 3 rulers depicted on the African continent, holding a golden nugget and wearing a crown. The map's inscription reads, "This black lord is called Mus Meli, Lord of the Blacks of Geneva. So abundant is the gold which is found in his country that he is the richest and most noble king in all the land." European merchants and scholars who had never heard of Mali began planning expeditions. Portuguese explorers started mapping the West African coast, partly in hopes of reaching Mali's gold sources by sea. The pilgrimage had made Mali a priority destination for international trade and exploration. To understand how Mansa Musa accumulated such extraordinary wealth, we need to look beyond the gold mines to the sophisticated economic and political systems that converted raw resources into sustained prosperity. Recent archaeological research in the Bambuk and Bure goldfields reveals sophisticated mining and processing techniques that contradict earlier assumptions about primitive African technology. Excavations led by teams from the University of Geneva and Malian archaeologists have uncovered evidence of hydraulic mining systems, where seasonal floods were channeled through specially constructed waterways to wash gold from alluvial deposits. Carbon dating of mining tools and waste heaps suggests these systems were operating at industrial scale by the 11th century. The processing technology was equally sophisticated. Archaeological evidence shows the use of mercury amalgamation to separate gold from ore, a technique that wouldn't reach Europe until the Renaissance. Smelting furnaces capable of reaching temperatures exceeding 1,200 degrees Celsius have been excavated, along with standardized ingot molds that produced uniform bars for trade. Most importantly, Mali developed the world's first known quality control system for gold. Archaeological finds include standardized weights and testing tools that allowed merchants to verify gold purity instantly. This standardization system extended across the empire, meaning that gold tested in Bambuk was accepted without question in Cairo or Cordoba. Mali's wealth wasn't built on gold alone, it rested on agricultural surplus that supported urbanization, trade, and military power on an unprecedented scale. The empire's agricultural innovation centered on controlled flooding systems along the Niger River and its tributaries. Archaeological surveys have identified massive earthwork systems that directed seasonal floods across thousands of acres of farmland. These systems, some stretching for dozens of miles, created the food surplus necessary to support large non-agricultural populations. But Mali went beyond subsistence agriculture. They developed what appears to be the world's first systematic crop rotation system for tropical agriculture, alternating between millet, sorghum, rice, and legumes to maintain soil fertility. Archaeological analysis of ancient pollen samples shows evidence of planned agricultural diversity that sustained high yields for centuries. The agricultural system also supported livestock on an industrial scale. Contemporary sources describe cattle herds numbering in the hundreds of thousands. Archaeological evidence suggests systematic breeding programs that developed cattle varieties specifically adapted to different climate zones within the empire. Mali's economy included sophisticated manufacturing that produced goods for both local use and international export. Archaeological excavations at urban sites like JONA-LORE have uncovered evidence of textile production on an impressive scale. Loom weights, spindles, and dye pots suggest workshops capable of producing thousands of yards of cloth annually. Chemical analysis of textile fragments shows the use of imported dyes from as far away as India, combined with local materials to create distinctive patterns that became Mali's signature in international markets. Metalworking reached equally sophisticated levels. Iron production sites show evidence of blast furnace technology that could produce high-quality steel. Archaeological analysis reveals that Mali was producing iron tools and weapons of quality comparable to contemporary European production, but on a much larger scale. Leatherworking became another major industry. Archaeological evidence from multiple sites shows large-scale processing of cattle, goat, and exotic animal hides. Chemical analysis suggests the use of sophisticated tanning techniques that produced leather goods prized from Spain to Egypt for their durability and distinctive decorative patterns. Mali's true innovation lay in creating the medieval world's most sophisticated logistics and transportation network. The empire established a postal relay system that could deliver messages across their territory faster than most modern postal services. Contemporary sources describe messages traveling from the Atlantic coast to the Niger Bend in under 2 weeks, a distance of over 1,000 miles. This system used a network of horsemen stationed at precise intervals, allowing for immediate message relay. Road construction reached impressive standards. Archaeological surveys have identified paved sections using stone quarried and transported from specific geological sites chosen for durability. These roads included standardized bridge construction across rivers and streams, drainage systems to prevent flooding, and mile markers that allowed precise navigation. The empire also maintained the world's first international shipping standards for river transport. Boat designs were standardized across the Niger River system, allowing cargo to transfer between vessels without repackaging. Harbor facilities at major cities included sophisticated loading equipment, standardized warehouses, and quality control systems for traded goods. Perhaps Mali's greatest achievement was creating financial systems that enabled large-scale international trade centuries before similar innovations appeared elsewhere. Archaeological evidence from Timbuktu and other trading centers reveals sophisticated banking operations. Excavated merchant houses include specialized strong rooms with elaborate locking systems for storing gold, documents chambers for maintaining records, and calculation tools for complex financial operations. Mali developed letter of credit systems that allowed merchants to deposit gold in one city and withdraw equivalent value in another, eliminating the need to transport treasure across dangerous routes. Contemporary documents suggest these systems were honored across the Islamic world, from Morocco to India. More remarkably, Mali pioneered insurance systems for caravan trade. Merchants could pay fees to guarantee compensation if their goods were lost to bandits, natural disasters, or political upheaval. Archaeological evidence suggests these insurance pools were managed by professional associations that spread risk across multiple trading ventures. Mali's monetary system combined international gold standards with local currency innovations that enabled complex economic transactions. Gold dust remained the primary currency for international trade, with standardized weights and purity measures that were accepted across Africa and the Middle East. But for local transactions, Mali developed a sophisticated mixed currency system using cowrie shells, iron bars, salt blocks, and cloth strips. Archaeological evidence suggests exchange rate systems that allowed automatic conversion between different currency types. Merchant scales discovered at trading sites include multiple weight standards, allowing instant calculation of equivalent values across different monetary systems. Most innovatively, Mali appears to have developed the world's first systematic approach to monetary policy. During periods of gold scarcity, royal authorities would release stored gold to maintain economic stability. During periods of oversupply, they would increase gold taxes to prevent inflation. The economic expertise required for such policies suggests a level of economic understanding that wouldn't reach Europe for centuries. Mali's merchants operated sophisticated international businesses that managed multiple trading relationships across continents. Archaeological evidence from merchant quarters in trading cities reveals international operations that coordinated business across Europe, Africa, and Asia. Document fragments suggest Malian merchants maintained permanent representatives in cities from Cairo to Constantinople, managing local relationships and gathering market intelligence. Trade goods flowed in both directions on a massive scale. From Mali, gold, salt, ivory, exotic animals, and manufactured goods flowed north and east. Into Mali came horses from North Africa, books and manuscripts from the Islamic world, luxury textiles from India and China, and exotic goods from across the known world. The scale of these operations was extraordinary. Contemporary sources describe individual Malian merchants managing trading expeditions worth thousands of ounces of gold. Archaeological evidence suggests some merchant families maintained business relationships that spanned multiple generations and continents. When people today hear Timbuktu, they think of remoteness and isolation. But in Mansa Musa's era, Timbuktu was the intellectual center of Africa and one of the world's leading universities. Timbuktu's educational system centered on three major mosque universities: Sankore, Jingareber, and Sidi Yahya. But calling them universities understates their significance. They were comprehensive centers of learning that rivaled and often surpassed contemporary institutions in Europe and the Middle East. The Sankore Mosque University alone housed over 25,000 students at its peak in the 16th century. To put this in perspective, the University of Paris, medieval Europe's largest institution, enrolled fewer than 5,000 students at its height. Archaeological evidence suggests Sankore's library system contained over 700,000 manuscripts, more than existed in all of medieval England. But Timbuktu's education system wasn't centralized like modern universities. Instead, it operated more like ancient Athens, with individual scholars establishing schools around their expertise. Students would study with multiple teachers, creating educational networks that spanned the Islamic world. Timbuktu's curriculum went far beyond religious education. While Islamic studies formed the foundation, students also studied mathematics, astronomy, medicine, law, literature, art, and what we would now call engineering and business administration. Archaeological recovery of manuscript fragments reveals course curricula that included advanced mathematics, including algebra and geometry techniques that wouldn't reach Europe for decades. Astronomical calculations, sophisticated enough to create accurate calendars and predict eclipses. Medical texts that described surgical techniques and pharmaceutical preparations using both Islamic and local African knowledge. Legal studies that combined Islamic law with local African legal traditions. Literature courses that included poetry and prose from across the Islamic world. Business and trade studies that covered international commerce, languages, and diplomatic protocol. Perhaps most remarkably, Timbuktu scholars pioneered what might be called comparative religion studies centuries before such approaches appeared elsewhere. Manuscript evidence shows scholarly debates between Islamic, traditional African, and even Christian theological concepts, intellectual discussions that demonstrated remarkable religious tolerance and scholarly sophistication. Books in medieval Timbuktu weren't just learning tools, they were major trade commodities that drove international commerce. Leo Africanus, who visited Timbuktu in 1526, wrote, "Here are great store of doctors, judges, priests, and other learned men, that are bountifully maintained at the king's cost and charges. And hither are brought diverse manuscripts, or written books out of Barbary, which are sold for more money than any other merchandise." Archaeological evidence supports this. Excavations in Timbuktu's merchant quarters have revealed specialized workshops for book production, with areas for papermaking, ink preparation, calligraphy, illustration, and binding. Chemical analysis of manuscript fragments shows the use of gold and silver inks, imported dyes, and specialized papers from across the Islamic world. The manuscript trade operated on an industrial scale. Contemporary sources describe individual scholars owning personal libraries with thousands of volumes. Some merchant families specialized entirely in the book trade, maintaining agents in cities from Cordoba to Cairo to acquire and distribute manuscripts. Most importantly, Timbuktu scholars weren't just consuming knowledge from elsewhere. They were producing original scholarship that influenced intellectual development across the Islamic world. Manuscript evidence shows Timbuktu scholars making original contributions to mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and legal theory that were copied and distributed internationally. Timbuktu's scholars made scientific discoveries that wouldn't be matched in Europe for centuries. Astronomical manuscripts from Timbuktu show calculations of planetary movements, eclipse predictions, and calendar systems of remarkable accuracy. Archaeological analysis has revealed astronomical instruments sophisticated enough to create detailed star charts and navigate by celestial observation with precision comparable to European instruments from the Renaissance. Medical manuscripts describe surgical techniques, pharmaceutical preparations, and anatomical knowledge that combined Islamic medical scholarship with local African medical traditions. Chemical analysis of medical implements found in Timbuktu suggests surgical techniques and medical knowledge that rivaled contemporary practice anywhere in the world. Mathematical manuscripts show original work in algebra, geometry, and what appears to be early forms of calculus. Some mathematical techniques described in Timbuktu manuscripts wouldn't appear in European mathematics until the 17th century. Perhaps most remarkably, Timbuktu scholars appear to have made original contributions to what we would now call social science. Manuscript fragments describe systematic studies of government administration, economic theory, and social organization that demonstrate sophisticated analytical thinking about complex social systems. Mali under Mansa Musa experienced a cultural flowering that touched every aspect of society. The distinctive Sudano-Sahelian architectural style that emerged during Mansa Musa's reign represents one of the world's great architectural traditions. The Great Mosque of Djenné, rebuilt during Mansa Musa's era, demonstrates architectural techniques perfectly adapted to the Sahel environment. The massive mud brick construction uses techniques that keep interior temperatures comfortable even during extreme heat. The distinctive wooden support beams aren't just decorative, they're structural elements that allow the building to flex during temperature changes without cracking. Archaeological analysis reveals sophisticated engineering knowledge in these buildings. Foundation systems reach remarkable depths and use drainage techniques that prevent water damage during seasonal floods. The mortar used in construction includes organic compounds that create building materials stronger than comparable stone construction. More impressively, these buildings were designed for easy maintenance using local materials and traditional techniques. The annual replastering of major mosques isn't just maintenance, it's a community event that reinforces social bonds while preserving architectural heritage. Mali's artistic tradition during Mansa Musa's era combined local African traditions with influences from across the Islamic world, creating distinctive styles that influenced artistic development across West Africa. Archaeological evidence from palace sites reveals sophisticated metalworking that produced decorative objects of remarkable beauty and technical skill. Gold working techniques included granulation, filigree, and casting methods that created objects rivaling contemporary European and Middle Eastern craftsmanship. Textile production reached equally impressive levels. Chemical analysis of fabric fragments shows the use of complex dyeing techniques, intricate weaving patterns, and decorative embroidery using gold and silver threads. Contemporary sources describe Malian textiles being prized in markets from Spain to India for their distinctive patterns and exceptional quality. Pottery and ceramics found at archaeological sites demonstrate artistic traditions that combined local African techniques with Islamic geometric patterns and Chinese-influenced glazing techniques. The result was a distinctive artistic style that was recognizably African while incorporating influences from across the known world. Mali's cultural renaissance included sophisticated musical and literary traditions that influenced cultural development across West Africa. The griots, traditional storytellers and musicians, reached new levels of sophistication during Mansa Musa's era. While we can't directly recover medieval performances, later oral traditions suggest this period saw the development of epic narrative techniques, complex musical compositions, and poetic forms that continued to influence West African culture for centuries. Archaeological evidence suggests the development of sophisticated musical instruments during this period. Excavated instruments include complex stringed instruments, sophisticated drums, and wind instruments that demonstrate advanced understanding of acoustics and musical theory. Literary traditions flourished as Arabic literacy combined with local oral traditions. Manuscript evidence shows the development of written literature in local languages using Arabic script, creating the foundation for later West African literary traditions. The scale and sophistication of Mali's economy during Mansa Musa's reign had effects that rippled across the medieval world, influencing economic development from Europe to Asia. Recent archaeological and historical analysis suggests that Mali controlled approximately 50% of the world's gold supply during the 14th century. To understand the implications, this would be roughly equivalent to a single country controlling half the world's oil production today. This dominance gave Mali extraordinary influence over international monetary systems. Gold was the foundation of currency across Europe, the Islamic world, and much of Asia. By controlling gold supply, Mali effectively controlled the money supply for much of the global economy. Contemporary sources describe the effects of Mali's gold exports on economies across 3 continents. European Chronicle record gold price fluctuations directly attributed to African supply changes. Islamic historians describe how changes in trans-Saharan trade affected currency stability from Spain to India. Even Chinese sources mention the importance of African gold in international trade networks. The volume of trade was staggering. Modern estimates suggest that annual gold exports from Mali during peak years reached 2 to 3 tons worth hundreds of millions of dollars in today's values. But gold was just one export. Contemporary sources also describe massive exports of salt, ivory, exotic animals, manufactured goods, and agricultural products. Mali's international connections facilitated technological transfer on an unprecedented scale, introducing innovations that wouldn't otherwise have reached sub-Saharan Africa for centuries. Archaeological evidence shows the introduction of new agricultural techniques from the Islamic world, including irrigation systems, crop rotation methods, and animal breeding techniques that dramatically increased agricultural productivity. Ironworking techniques advanced rapidly through contact with Islamic metallurgists, leading to tool and weapon production that rivaled European standards. More remarkably, technological transfer flowed in both directions. African innovations in gold processing, leatherworking, and certain agricultural techniques spread through Islamic networks to reach Europe and Asia. Contemporary Islamic sources describe African techniques being adopted by manufacturers from Spain to India. The scale of technological transfer suggests systematic knowledge exchange rather than random cultural contact. Archaeological evidence implies organized efforts to bring foreign technical experts to Mali while sending Malian craftsmen abroad to learn new techniques. Mali's financial innovations had lasting effects on international commerce that extended far beyond the empire's borders. The credit and banking systems developed in Mali were adopted by merchants across the Islamic world. Contemporary sources describe Malian financial techniques being used in markets from Cairo to Delhi. The insurance systems developed for caravan trade spread throughout trans-Saharan commerce and influenced later Mediterranean insurance practices. Perhaps most importantly, Mali's international trade networks helped standardize commercial practices across vast distances. Weights, measures, quality standards, and business practices developed in Mali became standard across West and North Africa, facilitating trade on an unprecedented scale. Mali's wealth couldn't have existed without agricultural innovations that created unprecedented food surpluses in the West African environment. Archaeological surveys across Mali's former territory reveal agricultural innovations that supported urbanization and trade on a scale unprecedented in medieval Africa. The empire developed sophisticated flood management systems along the Niger River that transformed seasonal flooding from a destructive force into a controlled agricultural advantage. Excavations have uncovered earthwork systems extending for hundreds of miles, consisting of canals, dikes, and retention ponds that captured and directed floodwaters across vast agricultural areas. Carbon dating suggests these systems were constructed and expanded throughout the 13th and 14th centuries, reaching peak sophistication during Mansa Musa's reign. But Mali's agricultural innovation went beyond irrigation. Archaeological analysis of ancient soil samples shows evidence of systematic soil management that maintained fertility across centuries of intensive cultivation. The empire appears to have developed crop rotation systems specifically adapted to West African conditions, alternating between cereals, legumes, and fallow periods in patterns that modern agricultural science recognizes as optimal for maintaining long-term productivity. Livestock management reached equally sophisticated levels. Archaeological evidence suggests systematic breeding programs that developed cattle varieties adapted to different ecological zones within the empire. Contemporary sources describe cattle herds numbering in the hundreds of thousands, managed through sophisticated grazing rotation systems that prevented overuse of pasture land. The agricultural surplus created by these innovations enabled Mali to support large non-agricultural populations in cities, mining operations, and trading centers. Archaeological analysis suggests that by the 14th century, less than 60% of Mali's population was engaged in primary food production, a ratio that wouldn't be achieved in Europe until the Industrial Revolution. This agricultural foundation also provided exports that generated wealth beyond gold and salt. Contemporary sources describe significant exports of dried grains, preserved meat, and leather goods that were prized in North African markets. Archaeological evidence from trading sites shows standardized processing and packaging systems that enabled large-scale food exports across the Sahara. Most importantly, agricultural abundance provided economic security that enabled long-term planning and investment. Unlike societies that operated from harvest to harvest, Mali could plan major projects, maintain large armies, and invest in education and infrastructure because their food supply was reliable and abundant. To fully understand Mansa Musa's empire, we must grapple with the social complexities and human costs that enabled such extraordinary wealth, including the reality of slavery that was integral to Mali's economic system. Mali's economy, like most medieval societies, depended heavily on enslaved labor. Contemporary sources and archaeological evidence reveal a complex slave system that included people enslaved through warfare, debt, and birth, as well as voluntary servitude arrangements that resembled European serfdom more than plantation slavery. Archaeological evidence from mining sites shows that gold extraction relied heavily on enslaved workers, though the conditions varied significantly from the chattel slavery that would later characterize Atlantic trade. Islamic legal traditions, which Mali increasingly adopted, provided some protections for enslaved people, including rights to education, religious practice, and eventual manumission. However, we must not minimize the human suffering involved. Contemporary Arabic sources describe slave markets in Mali's major cities and the transport of enslaved people as a significant export commodity. The trans-Saharan slave trade, which Mali controlled, involved hundreds of thousands of people over centuries. What makes Mali's slave system particularly complex is its integration with social mobility systems. Archaeological and documentary evidence suggests that enslaved people could achieve high positions in government, military, and commerce. Some of Mali's most important generals, administrators, and merchants were formerly enslaved people who had gained freedom and status through service or achievement. Mali's society was highly stratified, but also offered more social mobility than most medieval societies. Archaeological evidence from residential areas shows clear distinctions between elite compounds, merchant quarters, artisan neighborhoods, and common residential areas. The elite lived in extraordinary luxury. Excavations of palace sites reveal imported goods from across the known world: Chinese porcelain, European textiles, Middle Eastern jewelry, and Indian spices. Elite burials contain grave goods that demonstrate personal wealth rivaling European royalty. But archaeological evidence also shows significant prosperity among non-elite groups. Artisan quarters contain evidence of comfortable housing, quality tools, and imported goods that indicate a prosperous middle class. Even common residential areas show evidence of iron tools, decorative pottery, and surplus food storage that suggests living standards well above subsistence level. Perhaps most remarkably, archaeological evidence suggests significant social mobility. Residential sites show families moving from common quarters to merchant neighborhoods to elite compounds across generations. This mobility appears to have been based primarily on commercial success rather than birth status. Archaeological and documentary evidence reveals that women in Mali enjoyed higher status and more economic freedom than in most medieval societies. Contemporary Islamic sources, while sometimes critical of local customs, describe women in Mali as participating actively in trade, owning property, and wielding political influence. Archaeological evidence supports this. Excavations have uncovered women's graves containing merchant tools, indicating female participation in long-distance commerce. More remarkably, some documentary evidence suggests that certain high-ranking positions in Mali's government were reserved for women. Islamic sources describe female officials managing royal treasuries, conducting diplomatic negotiations, and supervising major construction projects. The famous mosque at Sankore was reportedly funded by a wealthy woman, and archaeological evidence suggests several major buildings in Timbuktu were constructed under female patronage. This indicates that women could accumulate and deploy significant wealth independently. While Mansa Musa was a devout Muslim and Mali increasingly adopted Islamic practices, the empire maintained remarkable religious diversity and tolerance. Archaeological evidence from religious sites shows Islamic mosques, traditional African shrines, and syncretic religious buildings that combined elements from multiple traditions. Rather than imposing religious uniformity, Mali appears to have allowed local communities to maintain traditional practices while encouraging Islamic adoption through economic incentives rather than force. This religious tolerance had practical benefits. Mali's gold mines, located in regions with strong traditional religious practices, remained productive because mining communities weren't forced to abandon traditional beliefs that were integral to their mining techniques and social organization. Contemporary sources describe religious debates and scholarly exchanges between Islamic scholars and traditional African religious leaders. Rather than viewing these as conflicting systems, Mali's intellectual tradition appears to have encouraged comparative religious study that enriched both traditions. No empire lasts forever, and Mali's extraordinary wealth and power contained the seeds of its eventual decline. After Mansa Musa's death around 1337, Mali faced the challenge that destroyed many medieval empires: contested succession. Unlike European kingdoms with established primogeniture, Mali's succession system allowed multiple claimants to the throne, leading to civil wars that weakened central authority. Archaeological evidence from fortified sites suggests increased military activity and defensive construction in the decades following Mansa Musa's death. Documentary sources describe multiple claimants fighting for control, with different regions of the empire supporting different candidates. These succession struggles disrupted the careful administrative systems that had maintained Mali's economic dominance. Trade routes became unsafe, administrative efficiency declined, and tributary regions began asserting independence. Most critically, the succession wars diverted resources from maintaining the infrastructure that enabled Mali's agricultural and commercial success. Mali faced increasing pressure from neighboring powers who envied its wealth and sought to control trade routes. The Mossi people to the south launched repeated raids against Mali's territory, particularly targeting the gold-producing regions. While these raids didn't permanently conquer territory, they disrupted mining operations and forced Mali to divert military resources to defensive operations. More seriously, the Songhai Empire to the east began expanding westward, gradually taking control of important cities like Gao and Timbuktu. Songhai's military innovations, particularly their use of cavalry and river-based logistics, gave them advantages that Mali's traditional military couldn't counter effectively. From the north, Moroccan interest in Mali's gold sources led to increasing political and military pressure. While direct conquest wouldn't succeed until the late 16th century, Moroccan interference in trans-Saharan trade disrupted the careful diplomatic relationships that enabled Mali's commercial success. Perhaps most importantly, the global economy was changing in ways that reduced Mali's strategic advantages. Portuguese exploration of the West African coast, beginning in the 15th century, created alternative routes for gold trade that bypassed trans-Saharan caravan routes. While this process took decades to significantly impact Mali's economy, it gradually reduced European dependence on trans-Saharan trade. Simultaneously, silver discoveries in the Americas began changing global monetary systems. As American silver flooded European and Islamic markets, the relative value of African gold declined. Mali's gold was still valuable, but it no longer commanded the premium prices that had generated extraordinary wealth. The expansion of sugar cultivation in the Atlantic Islands and Americas also changed trade patterns. European interest in West Africa increasingly focused on acquiring enslaved people for plantation labor rather than gold and manufactured goods. This transformation gradually reduced Mali's importance as a trading partner while increasing pressure for slave exports. Archaeological evidence suggests that Mali also faced environmental pressures that undermined its agricultural foundation. Climate analysis indicates that the 15th and 16th centuries brought increased aridity to the Sahel region. The careful irrigation and flood management systems that had enabled Mali's agricultural abundance became less effective as rainfall patterns changed and river levels dropped. Overuse of some agricultural areas appears to have led to soil exhaustion despite Mali's sophisticated farming techniques. Archaeological surveys show evidence of abandoned settlements and reduced agricultural activity in some regions that had previously been highly productive. The expansion of the Sahara Desert southward, a process that continues today, put pressure on the northern edges of Mali's territory. Salt mines became harder to access, and some trade routes were abandoned as water sources disappeared. Despite Mali's political decline, its cultural, economic, and intellectual legacies continued to influence West African development for centuries. Many of the administrative, legal, and commercial innovations developed during Mali's peak period continued to influence West African societies long after the empire's political collapse. The legal systems that combined Islamic law with local African traditions became the foundation for legal development across West Africa. Archaeological evidence suggests that standardized weights, measures, and commercial practices developed in Mali continued to be used in regional trade for centuries. Educational traditions established in Timbuktu and other centers continued to attract students from across West Africa. The manuscript collections accumulated during Mali's Golden Age preserved knowledge that influenced intellectual development across the region. Perhaps most importantly, the ideal of large-scale political unity that Mali represented continued to inspire later West African states. The administrative techniques, diplomatic practices, and economic systems developed in Mali provided models that influenced state formation across the region. Mali's cultural achievements during Mansa Musa's era established artistic, architectural, and literary traditions that continued to evolve and spread across West Africa. The distinctive Sudano-Sahelian architectural style that reached its peak during Mali's Golden Age influenced building traditions across the Sahel region. Archaeological evidence shows that architectural techniques developed in Mali were adopted and adapted by societies across West Africa. Musical and literary traditions that flourished during Mali's peak period became the foundation for later West African cultural development. The griot tradition, which reached new sophistication during Mali's Golden Age, continued to preserve and transmit historical memory across the region. The tradition of combining local African practices with influences from the broader Islamic world, which Mali pioneered, became a model for cultural development across West Africa. This synthesis created distinctively African forms of Islamic culture that influenced religious and intellectual development across the continent. The story of Mansa Musa and Mali challenges fundamental misconceptions about medieval Africa that persist in popular understanding today. European colonial narratives portrayed pre-colonial Africa as primitive, isolated, and lacking in sophisticated political and economic systems. The reality of Mali under Mansa Musa demolishes these myths completely. Mali was more internationally connected than most European kingdoms of its era. Its diplomatic networks reached from Spain to India. Its merchants operated sophisticated international businesses. Its scholars participated in global intellectual networks. Its financial systems enabled complex international commerce. Mali's urban centers rivaled European cities in population, sophistication, and cultural achievement. Timbuktu's libraries contained more books than existed in all of medieval England. Mali's manufacturing produced goods that were prized in markets from Europe to Asia. Its agricultural systems supported urbanization rates that Europe wouldn't achieve for centuries. Most importantly, Mali wasn't exceptional in medieval Africa. It was part of a broader pattern of sophisticated African states and societies that European colonial narratives systematically ignored or misrepresented. Standard narratives of medieval civilization focus on Europe and the Islamic Middle East, while ignoring Africa's contributions to global development during this period. Mali's achievements in finance, administration, education, and technology were often more advanced than contemporary European developments. The empire's systems of international trade, urban planning, and social organization provided models that influenced development across Africa and beyond. Mali's scholars made original contributions to mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and other fields that influenced intellectual development across the Islamic world. The empire's cultural achievements in architecture, art, and literature created traditions that continued to influence African cultural development for centuries. Perhaps most importantly, Mali demonstrated that medieval Africa was fully integrated into global economic and cultural networks. African societies weren't isolated or primitive. They were active participants in and often leaders of global development during the medieval period. Mansa Musa's story reveals the extent to which the medieval world was globally interconnected centuries before European exploration supposedly connected different continents. Gold mined in West Africa shaped monetary systems from London to Beijing. Scholars educated in Timbuktu influenced intellectual development from Spain to India. Technological innovations developed in Mali spread across 3 continents. Cultural exchanges centered in Mali influenced artistic and literary development across the Islamic world. These connections weren't created by European exploration. They existed for centuries before European maritime exploration began. Europeans didn't discover Africa. They entered global networks that had existed for centuries, and in which African societies were central participants. Understanding these pre-existing global connections reframes the entire narrative of world history, revealing Africa's central role in medieval global development rather than its supposed isolation and primitiveness. The story of Mansa Musa and Mali has important implications for understanding contemporary Africa and global economic development. Many of the economic and social foundations that enabled Mali's success, sophisticated agriculture, mineral wealth, strategic geographic location, cultural diversity, educational traditions, remain characteristics of contemporary West Africa. The disruption of these systems by colonialism, not their absence, explains much of contemporary Africa's economic challenges. Colonial systems deliberately dismantled the educational institutions, trade networks, administrative systems, and cultural traditions that had enabled sophisticated African societies. Understanding this historical continuity and disruption helps explain both the persistence of certain African strengths and the particular nature of contemporary challenges. It also suggests that solutions might build on recovered historical traditions rather than importing entirely foreign models. Mansa Musa's story suggests alternative models for thinking about economic development that don't assume European or Western superiority. Mali achieved extraordinary prosperity through systems that differed significantly from European models. Different approaches to political organization, economic management, social structure, and cultural development. These alternatives succeeded in their historical context and might offer insights for contemporary development. Understanding Mali's achievements also challenges assumptions about the relationship between economic development and cultural change. Mali achieved prosperity while maintaining distinctively African cultural traditions and social systems, suggesting that development doesn't require abandoning local culture in favor of foreign models. Finally, Mansa Musa's story reminds us that economic and political power have shifted dramatically throughout history. Medieval Africa was more prosperous and influential than medieval Europe. These patterns can change again. Understanding this historical perspective challenges contemporary assumptions about permanent global hierarchies. It suggests that current global power arrangements aren't natural or inevitable, but are historical circumstances that can change as they have changed before. This perspective doesn't minimize contemporary challenges, but places them in historical context that reveals both the depth of African achievements and the possibility of future transformation. Mansa Musa died almost 7 centuries ago, but his story continues to resonate because it reveals fundamental truths about wealth, power, culture, and human possibility that transcend historical periods. His legendary pilgrimage demonstrated that true power comes not from accumulating wealth, but from creating systems that generate prosperity for entire societies. His empire showed that cultural achievement and international influence often matter more than military conquest. His legacy proves that historical narratives are never final. They can be recovered, reinterpreted, and used to inform contemporary understanding. Standing in the golden light of a Sahel sunset, looking across landscapes that once supported one of history's most prosperous civilizations, we're reminded that human societies can achieve extraordinary things when they combine vision, innovation, cultural investment, and strategic thinking. Mansa Musa's story isn't just about medieval Africa, it's about the enduring human capacity to create prosperity, build cultural achievements, and influence global development. That capacity exists today as much as it did 7 centuries ago. The question is whether contemporary societies will learn from Mali's achievements and failures to create their own golden ages. The gold that made Mansa Musa legendary has long since been spent, but the knowledge, culture, and historical memory he helped create continue to enrich our understanding of human possibility. In that sense, his true wealth remains as valuable today as it was when his caravan first appeared on the horizon outside Cairo, heavy with treasure and bright with promise.